Hi everyone. I want to talk a little bit about yoga and the body and injury. So there was a recent podcast that I listened to where Andrea Ferretti from Yoga Land, it's the same podcast that I've been on, interviewed Jill Miller, who is the yogini that created the yoga tune-up balls, the little rubber balls that I've spoken about before in these newsletters that are incredible and really helpful for self-massage and healing injury, and there's a whole list of positive things these balls do. So Jill had posted on social media a week or so ago that she's having hip replacement surgery. And it got a lot of attention because this has been kind of slowly coming into the yoga sphere in recent years. A number of senior yoga teachers having hip replacements. And so when Jill did this post, there was a lot of flurry and commenting about it. And she then went on Andrea's podcast right before she actually had the hip surgery. So it's a great podcast. I highly recommend you listening to it. And it really has been something I've personally been thinking about now for a really long time, probably about 5 years. I'm 45 now, so kind of when I hit 40 and really felt my body going through some changes. And then there are these whispers of senior yoga teachers having a lot of hip issues. I've been really thinking about, are we practicing as a culture yoga in a healthy and a sustainable way? Well, the first thing I want to say about this is we're all a little bit kind of guinea pigs because the truth is us Westerners have taken one little piece of a very big practice and amplified it and increased it in intensity, the physical aspect of yoga, asana practice. It never was really practiced to that degree in India, and maybe not my generation, but the generation before me, and then my generation, are kind of testing what happens really in the body when we practice very intensely long term. So if you look to the yoga texts, the ones that we have on the actual practice of yoga asana, there's only a few poses that are recommended. I'm thinking of the Hatha Yoga Pradipika and the Garanda Samhita, these ones that actually list poses. They only list like 15 or 30 postures, okay? So we've taken it way further now in modern yoga. And the story goes that the introduction of handstands and headstands and some of the more acrobatic-like poses actually came in our lifetime, came in the early 1900s when Krishnamacharya was teaching at the Mysore Palace, and it was also occupied by the British. He was the resident yoga teacher, and the British were there doing their gymnastics. And so these two systems kind of got to meet each other, and yoga adopted some of these more gymnastic-like movements and poses. To my knowledge, there's no list of handstand or 10-minute headstands or those kinds of things, extreme arm balances, none of that stuff in any of the yoga books, the old yoga books. There's just a condensed amount of postures. So not only have we added on and, been more creative and added more challenge and more intensity and difficulty, we are living a very different life than 1,000 or 2,000 years ago. If you do your research on that time frame, like medieval India, the average lifespan was probably 45 years old or something. And now we're living into our 90s. So not only have we expanded upon the poses and how long we practice and how intensely we practice and what we practice at the physical level, we're living much longer. So we're starting younger and practicing much longer. So I've had this concern for a while. If we're pushing our bodies very strongly and hardly in the early years of practice, what is that going to mean for us as we age? Are we practicing in a sustainable way, and are we going to am I going to end up having pain in my body later on because I pushed so hard in my youth? Now, I got to a certain point in my yoga practice where I had been pushing to some degree and really testing my mobility and testing my strength and coordination. But then I made a choice to have a family. And had I not made that choice, I might have stayed pretty intense in my yoga practice. But because I had children and I needed my energy to go more towards parenting, my yoga practice became more of something that helped balance me and preserve my energy, and honestly more meditation, because that's just what I needed to balance out the realities of day-to-day parenting. So I probably didn't go as hard and as strong as I could have or would have if I hadn't made that choice to become a parent. So I don't know yet. I don't have physical pain. I have a few aches and old injuries that are actually not yoga related. So I don't have pain. In the case of Jill Miller, she had to have a hip replacement. She started to have pain. It wasn't all the time, but there were these moments of pain, and she knew what muscle it was and what was happening. And because she was such a skilled anatomist and has her tune-up balls and all these tools and health practitioners that she relies on, she would very quickly get out of the pain. So she didn't quite realize what state her hip was in. And long story short, you'll hear all this if you listen to the podcast. When she finally went and had the MRI, there was just nothing left in there. It was bone on bone, and she'd lost a huge degree of mobility in that one hip as compared to the other. And the only solution was a hip replacement. So she thinks she became the bendy, flexible body that pushed really hard and became very overly flexible for quite a number of years. And she thinks that it was doing the extreme poses that led her to that. Specifically, she talks about both feet behind the head, and straddle splits where the legs are as far apart as possible. So I think the reason why I'm making this video is I just want us to really think about how we're practicing, to place less emphasis on the body and physical achievement of the poses, which is never how it was laid out in any of the yoga manuals, and to listen to the signals of our bodies. Number one, listen. And number two, just know that because you can do something in your 20s or even your early 30s doesn't necessarily mean you should be doing it, because you may down the line years later end up in pain or end up with too much wear and tear and injury. Now, that being said, we're all going to have some amount of wear and tear. That's part of having a body, and that's part of aging. But mindfulness is key, and honoring your limitations is key. And I think reframing how and why you practice. The body's going to change. The poses are not really the goal of yoga, and it's the more subtle work. It's more about meditation and pranayama and understanding ourselves at deeper and deeper and deeper levels. Because I think we all want to live a happier, more fulfilled and healthy life. And I know for myself, I certainly don't want to be in my 70s and 80s in a ton of physical pain. I want to feel really good in my body. So I'm just here to remind you of that and support you in taking a very balanced approach to your practice. Your body is the temple. Don't abuse the temple, right? It's never going to produce a good result. So I hope that's helpful to you, and may we practice our yoga in a balanced and sustainable way for the rest of our lives, long term. Namaste. Thanks, yogis.